like most good things and all great men, start with a woman. Now you may disagree, but next time think about your mother. It says not just a woman, but a special woman. And so Shakespeare and Company is no different from that. This bookshop was started by, the idea came from a great woman. A great woman, George, move. See, I haven't said this is the first time this year when he moves these photographs, I'm supposed to do like this, and she's supposed to be there. He's got some guy there. What has he done with Sylvia Beach? Sylvia, where are you? I'm not talking about the little one. Well, anyway, there's Sylvia Beach there. Okay, see, it's another picture like this that usually hangs here. And see, out of my routine, I do it, and it's not there. We'll branch and watch the love. There she is. Where is she? Way over there?
Yeah.
No, that's not. No, that's not. Yeah, but that's not the photograph I'm looking for. No, that's not it. It's a photograph like this, like anyway. Sylvia Beach was born in 1887 in the United States, and she died October 1962. In 1917, Sylvia Beach came to Paris with her sister, and they were installed in a apartment over on Palais Royal. And they served in World War I as Red Cross volunteers in Yugoslavia during the war. Then she came back to Paris and went back to the United States. And then she came back to Paris again. And her father had said something to her once, says, when are you going to, Cecilia, you know, a lot of the men in the church, her father was a minister. A lot of men in the church been asking about you, and blah, blah, blah. Says, when are you going to bring a son into the family? She says, Father, I'm not interested in any men. He says, what do you mean? She says, no, I'm just not interested in men. Women, yes, but men, no. He says, what are you saying? She says, I'm telling you the truth. You always told me to tell you the truth. He says, my preference? She says, my preference is women, not men. Oh, that's terrible for him. Not for her. So she left the United States like a lot of people in that time. And around Paris, going around to bookshops, looking around. And at number 12 Rue de l'Odéon, number 7 Rue de l'Odéon, was a place called La Maison des Amis de Livre. And there she was looking in the window at all these interesting books, poetry and good literature in the window. And then she got ready to walk away. And as she was walking away, a woman rushed out and said, just a minute, there are more interesting books inside. And this woman, the two of them did eye-to-eye contact. The French call it coup de foudre. In English we call it love at first sight. And that was Adrienne Monnier. And they never separated afterwards. It was the beginning of a friendship and a great love affair. And I say perhaps maybe greater than the other two, Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas. But anyway, that was the beginning. So she says, what are you going to do? She says, well, I'd like to have a bookshop in New York City like you have here, so I can have good literature and stuff like that. So she says, well, you should stay here in France. Says, here in Paris, we don't have a good English bookshop. She says, not one that concentrates just on English books. And she says, well, maybe so. Anyway, she says, think about it. So she wrote to her mother and asked about, and the mother told her that, in New York it's very, expensive to find a place to rent a place, blah, 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 and all like that. So she said, perhaps it would be better for you to start one in Paris. Meanwhile, Adrienne said, Sylvia, I got good news. There's a little place around the corner that's empty. And if you'd like to see it, perhaps you would rent it, pick up the lease. And so, that's at number 8 Rue Dupuytren is where they went in, and she says, this is wonderful. She says, well, where do I get the books? She says, well, there are a lot of places we can get the books. She says, we'll go to the American churches, the English churches, and places like that to see if people are selling books. And says, there is an old American library, and we can, see if they have any old books. So, and she said, write to England to get them, and said, have some sent over by boat from America. So, she started building her stock up in this little, it was once a laundry at 8 Rue Dupuytren. Now, Dupuytren is located between Rue École des Médecins and Rue Monsieur le Prince. It's just a little narrow street and it's all near the Carrefour Odeon. And so she was so excited about it, and so they worked very hard and to fix the book, fix it up. And she says, "But Sylvia, what are you going to name the bookshop?" She says, "I don't know." Says, "I haven't thought of it yet." Anyway, one evening, Audrey is getting ready for retire. She's yawning. She's, "Oh, let's go to bed." She says, "And please don't bring Shakespeare and Company in bed with us." She said, "That's it." She said, "What's wrong with you, you crazy American?" She said, "That's it. Shakespeare and Company. That's the name." So that's where we got the name Shakespeare and Company. So the next day, she had a sign made similar to this one. She had a sign made similar to this one, two sides, and had it put out in front of Rue Dupuytren. It stayed there for about 2 weeks, and someone stole it. Then she had another painted, and of course, someone stole that one too. But meanwhile, her bookshop was attracting a lot of people, and a stately writer walked in, and he says, "I really like your bookshop." And says, "I hear you loan books." She says, "Yes, I have a lending library. See, too cheap to pay rent and everything. It's one of the ways to do it. To have everyone comes in, they like this book, but if they don't buy it, you can just rent the book out, loan it." So he says, "Well, I'd like to borrow books from you." And that gentleman, George, he's moving again. Where are you? And anyway, "George, you're frustrating me. You move these pictures around. I usually can point at them right away." Yes. Well, anyway, I see him. He's over here by my hat. James Joyce. So James Joyce, and he says, he says, "I have some manuscripts, but part of it's been published in some of the small magazines in America and England." Says, "But in fact, in America, they wanted to lock the guy up that published some of the excerpts from it." And says, "But the business and everything," says, "I really wish I could get a publisher here in France." She says, "Oh, if you wrote something that the government of the United States and Britain are against it, I know what it must be. It must be something about violence, how to take an eyeball out of the person and bounce step on it, and how to take a knife and cut their guts out." He says, "No, it's rather erotic." She says, "Oh no, something about sex." He says, "Yes." She says, "Let me read the manuscript." Smart lady. So she read the manuscript. She says, "I will publish it." So he says, "You will?" And she says, "Yes, I will." Now, the first Shakespeare, Rue Dupuytren, opened November 1919. That's when the first one opened. 1919, Rue Dupuytren. And she met James Joyce during that time, and she was going to publish the book. She wanted the book to come out on his birthday, which would be Feb 2nd, 1922. But meanwhile, her bookshop is cluttered with books. She needs more space, and her wonderful friend says, "Sylvia, you won't believe it. You must come with me. I found a place." She says, "What?" She says, "Come." So they run. She runs up Rue L'Odeon. She says, "Where are we going to? Your shop?" She says, "No." They stop in front of her shop, number 7, Rue L'Odeon. And she says, "Look across the street." And number 12, Rue L'Odeon, was for rent. So that is the famous one. And that's where she's standing here. She's standing in number 12, Rue L'Odeon, which is across the street from number 7, Rue L'Odeon. So there she had another sign built, painted, only this time she made the character look more French, so it stayed up. So whoever was stealing the signs, it was, didn't want the one that looked like a French Shakespeare. Wanted one that looked like an English Shakespeare. So the sign stayed up, and that one, and number 12, Rue L'Odeon, was opened in 1921 in the summer. And meanwhile, Sylvia's rushing out to get James Joyce's book published, Ulysses. So she runs out to the printers and says, "Is it ready yet?" He says, No, madame, it's too much work. It's really to typeset this thing. It's in English, and it's really, she says, please, you gotta hurry. This was in January. And then she kept pestering the guys on their case. So she left one day, and one of the printers says, I know how we can have it ready by February 1st. Says, how? Watch this. Took a tray, wait, give me another 2 trays. And said, and then when she came, she says, look, I need it for tomorrow. He says, madame, it is ready. Oh, she hugs up, she's so happy. So the reason Sylvia wanted to have it out on James Joyce's, that was February 2nd, 1922. That's when the first edition of Ulysses was published. And James Joyce at the time, he was losing his sight anyway, so he's going through the thing, he's saying, and he looks and says, no, maybe a part is not written. No, see, she doesn't know it, he doesn't know it. Only the printers knew it. So, and sometimes I understand, because I sometimes look at poems and I say, I knew I wrote it, but if a part was out, I don't know if I remember or not. It's like that, I can't memorize. So James Joyce, and if you've read it, it's real dense, So so the book was published, whole lot of publicity on it, and Sylvia had borrowed money to have it published. She had almost went into debt and everything. And she went through everything to, and then she had a contract, just sort of like a gentleman's agreement, a handshake like a thing. And, but what happened, the publicity, now, the people that had subscribed for copies of Ulysses in the United States and England, they and Canada, at that time, Canada was really connected with England. So whatever way England went, Canada went that way also. So a few people received copies through the post. There were a few that took them back. But what happened in England was this. One guy who's a rare book dealer came and he opened his suitcase up at customs. The guy says, you got any dirty books? He says, no, I cleaned them all up before I brought them back. He says, you know what we mean, those filthy books. Pornography. He says, no. He says, the custom official says, Ulysses, I see you're reading good literature, the good Greek literature. And he says, that's not Greek. The guys in the custom office, what do you mean it's not Greek? Ulysses is Greek. He says, no, that's named James Joyce. Never heard of it. Let's see. Oh my God, look at this. Oh, this is trouble. You can't bring this in Britain. Have you got any other copies? He says, only 3. Oh, we sound the alarm. So England, they burn the copies. You see, they burn the copies. The United States, when they confiscated the copies, they put them away. So America has a lot of the first editions, even though 2 trays of the original manuscript is not in there. So what happened is, here it sold well, and then some of the people were sending copies to friends in Mexico, and they bring them across the border, because there, once again, ignorance of some men. What do you got in that package there? This is at the Mexican-American border. Just books. Is there any marijuana stuck down between the pages? No, let me see. Picked up Ulysses. No, there's no marijuana. No, it don't smell like. No, there's no marijuana there. Ulysses. What kind of book is that? Why do you have so many copies of Ulysses? He said, well, I like James Joyce. Well, damn, 12 copies. That's really something. Oh, okay, go on. Sure you don't have no marijuana? Nope, I have nothing like that, sir. Right on through. So, a lot of copies. Hi, your seat is here.
Well, maybe I should have stand in the door.
No, come right over here. We've been waiting. Because George said you were coming. Yes. He's out there. He said you're coming. You just missed part of it. I've been blah, blah, blah. Okay, so many people got copies of Ulysses through Mexico. Of course, you couldn't come through Canada. And then what happened is Sylvia Beach, after doing all those wonderful things with Joyce, finds out Joyce is sold, made a contract deal with another publisher, an English publisher, when they finally got the rights to publish it in England. And she never repaid. This is being videoed, George. George, you moved Sylvia Beach here. I kept doing like this and she wasn't here. I turned to talk about...
I'm the only housekeeper in this big institution. I pick up all the time, and some of those things fell down. I think there's 1 or 2 still down the floor.
Oh, I see.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, because I've been telling you, it was right like out of Groucho Marx movie. I do like this, and it wasn't there, and I do like this, and James Joyce and Sylvia standing at the doorway of...
there's a no picture of Sylvia. I should have brought it up.
Well, I see there's a lovely one of her over there smiling at me as I'm talking.
Right.
Yes, that's... So, so, so Joyce had signed another contract with someone else, and he never repaid Sylvia for what she did of publishing that great piece of literature. And then we'll go along a little farther on the thing. Now, at Librairie Maison des Amis de Livre,
Sit down. Sit down. Be comfortable.
I got them all sit. You see, all the ladies are seated, you know, and I didn't see her. She would have been seated. See, I told you, gentlemen. See, I did it. I didn't. Yet they're all seated. The gentlemen were very kind.
We don't want any gentlemen here. Just girls.
Okay, George, don't tell them that. You know, there may be some sensitive writers in the bunch. Okay. Be careful. You maybe find a James Joyce there. I hope no more. I'm not sure Hemingway. So, and speaking of Hemingway, he's still here. Hemingway. These are some of the people that frequented the bookshops of Audrey Monnier and Sylvia Beach. We'll start. You know, Ernest Hemingway and Gertrude Stein, and Alice B. Toklas, and the American poet William Carlos Williams. And Ezra Pound, and these are some, you know, that you've heard of, and Henri Michaud, and Huxley, and Poulenc, and Roman, Eric Satie, the musician, and Valerie, and André Gide, and Apollinaire, and Louis Aragon, and two people that I'm very fortunate that I got to meet, and one that became sort of a spiritual father for me, André Breton and Michel Héris. And I have photos of them sitting, not together, but Michel Héris sitting with some of the people in Audrey Monnier's bookshop, Maison des Amis de Livre. Now, everything is going wonderful about, you know, literary Paris, and, you know, the Paris that you read about, you know, all of the wonderful things. And of course, you saw it in the film of Anais Nin's, her journal that had been, nobody had nerve enough to publish it, but finally they did, you know, in Henry and June. Then here comes, like we're facing it again, here comes those men with their little guns again and their little flags and things like that marching along. This time, they come in, and some of them, they copying a little feathered animal. They want a goose step. So they come in. These are not poets. And, you know, so they came in with war, occupied Paris. And Adrian says, what we will do, said Sylvia, you know, it's going to be terrible. She says, yes, but America's not involved in it now, says, but then when America came into it, Sylvia was taken in as an enemy alien and put into, well, it wasn't a concentration camp, but it was a prison out in Vittel. So I guess they had good water, you know, on Vittel. She was there for 7 months. But one of Sylvia's workers, when the Nazis came in, they put a big yellow star on one of Sylvia Beach's workers. But Sylvia used to ride a bike along with this woman, going around Paris to do different chores. And Sylvia says she was very proud. She says, she works for me, and if they want to put a big Star of David on her and mark her out, says I will be in her company. Because a lot of people, you know, wouldn't have done that. But Sylvia Beach was a very strong individual woman who believed in freedom and liberty. And this woman was finally taken away and put into a concentration camp and never returned. She was one of the women that worked at Shakespeare and Company Bookstore at number 12, Rue de l'Odion. But meanwhile, one evening, he said, it's written that a man walked in wearing his shiny boots. He says, I would like a copy of Finnegan's Wake. He was a Gestapo agent. And she says, I'm sorry, we don't have him. You're lying, there's a copy in the back room. See, he had done his homework. He had everything. He had to spy her to come there. She says, oh, yes, there is, but that's my signed copy. He said, I'll make an offer for it. She says, no, it's not for sale. He says, you sure it's not for sale? She said, I'm sure I will not sell it. You think about it. I'll be back in a few days. And he left. So Sylvia told Adrian about it. She said, oh my goodness, the Gestapo agent wants a copy of Finnegan's Wake? And she says, yes. Says, what are you going to do? She says, I'm not going to sell it. He says, I'll hide it. I'm not going to sell it. She says, what we will do is do a wonderful thing, pull a whole thing on them. Says, what? Sylvia says, yes, it's good. That's a good idea. What we shall do. And what they did was they took all the books out, all of them out of the bookshop. That's a lot of books. There we are, it's still here. Took all the books and they stashed them into an apartment 2 flights above. And also Sylvia was living at that time in number 18 of Rue Lodion. And some of the things were put in there. And as the tale goes, that within about 2 weeks or 1 week, big motorcycle, 2 motorcyclists drive up, and this sergeant, this field level, jumps out of the staff car and lets into he says, oh, this must not be the bookshop, but there's no bookshop here. We'll go across the street. So they go across the street and they're confronted by her. They said, you don't have the copy of Finnegan's Wake? She said, no, you mean the bookshop that was across the street. This is not Shakespeare and Company. Oh, entschuldigen Sie, Fräulein. They go across the street. They say, there's no bookshop here. And they ring the concierge. The concierge comes with her pantoufles on. Oui, monsieur, what do you want? We're looking for Shakespeare and Company. You are looking for, there is a woman here that has a copy of the colonel's book. It says Finnegan's Wake. She said, we are going to take her in if she doesn't give it. And this concierge says, oh, yes. The concierge acting says, oh, that terrible American woman, she left here quite some time ago without paying me. She owes me. And she moved all her things, all her things in 2 trucks. And he says, where did she go? They say Berlin. Which is very funny. So, the Gestapo agent, even though he must evidently like good literature, he didn't get Finnegan's Wake, he didn't get Sylvia Beach either. So Sylvia had to hide out, and most of the time was spent with Adrien Monier's family out in the country. And then finally, like a lot of the little things that some of the bad men that love to do harm to others, physical harm, finally comes to an end. And then, because they have their little blood baths, and then the end of it. So, another tale says that at the end of the war, the Allies had landed and started freeing Europe from the Fiston Europa that Hitler had built. And one of the guys had zoomed up into Paris and zoomed up in a Jeep with 3 other American GIs was Mr. Macho himself, the great writer, Ernest Hemingway. He jumps out of the thing, Sylvia, where are you? And she runs, oh, Ernest, and grabs her like that and swings her around and says, is everything all right? Everything clear here? None of those krauts around? And she says, well, there are a few snipers, they say, are up on the roof. Oh, come on, fellas. Like out of a Hollywood movie, they said, he run up, where are they? Yeah. Well, he lived his prose. And he shot elephants. He shot rhinoceroses. I'm going to forgive you for that. You didn't even eat the elephants, man. You shoot animals for the eat everything. But he's still a great writer. If you haven't read A Movable Feast, you should get a copy of A Movable Feast. I think everyone in Paris should read A Movable Feast. You should read it actually before you come to Paris, but get a copy of A Movable Feast. So now we go from that part, and meanwhile, Adrien was she was ill, and she and Sylvia used to walk along Rue de la Boucherie. We'd come down Rue Saint-Jacques, and they'd go over to Notre Dame. They'd go over, maybe light a candle, and we'd come back past here. And sometimes they'd stop into a little Arab store that was located number 37 Rue de la Boucherie. We'd buy some fruit, going back to Rue Lodion. She was very ill, so in June 18th, actually, 1955, Adrien died at her own hands, and which made Sylvia very, very sad because her loved one was gone. And Sylvia would make her little trip past down Rue Saint Jacques over to burn a candle in Notre Dame, come back past the 37 Rue Beach, and she buys some fruit and go on. And one day she came back, and the little Arab store was gone. She says, "Oh, I have to find a new place to buy my afternoon." And then another time she came by, the store where the now was full of books. And she said, "Oh, bookstore, of course, magnet books." So she goes in, she looks, and she liked it because one of the things, books, just like this, good books. So she, and then she saw a book that she liked, and she was holding it. And she says, "Excuse me, sir, is this book, how much is this book?" And there was a gentleman sitting in the corner, reading a book. And when he's reading a book, usually nobody disturbs him because he's so engrossed in the book, he's not even there. And sitting near him was a big dog, but not this dog. It was another dog. And then she says, "Sir, how much is this book?" And he looked up and said, well, first he said, "Oh, it's Sylvia Beach." She says, "Yes, my name is George Whitman." So it was a beautiful encounter. And speaking of George, I have to do this right now. George, this is all the way from Paul Bowles to you.
Thank you.
That's your New Year's present. I got it signed and everything. All right?
We have some first editions of Paul Bowles in the bookstore.
I told him.
We have his autobiography, and we have some of his novels. First edition.
He says, just don't stick it into that autobiography that he doesn't
We're
like.
going to put it into, let it come down.
In a book, yeah, let it come down like that.
So you see, in our library, we have now actually there's book plates for the Sylvia Beach Memorial Library.
Right. And George, I'm going to
Paul
do.
Bowles has just signed it.
I'm going to do what they will do later on. They're going to go down. They'll buy copies of it. I want to get you to sign my copy. This is my copy. My copy.
Okay.
You have one of my friends in here.
Okay.
I had to put a circle around her, and of course Sylvia there.
Well, the other ones are in there too.
Huh? Yes, it's two or three.
Story number one.
Yes, I know. It's a lot of them here. The women I know. So sign my book. Let's see. I was just telling you, yes, please just sign it just to Ted Joans. Yes. And okay, so George Whitman and Sylvia Beach meet. And he says, "Well, when are you going to reopen the Shakespeare and Company Bookshop?" Also, she says, "Well, no." She says, "Well, you're doing all right." He said, "Well, Mistral is all right." See, it was a bookshop. George Whitman's bookshop was Mistral Bookshop at number 37 Rue de la Bucherie, where you are now. And she says, "Well, I don't think with Audrey gone, I don't have the feeling for it." Says, "Perhaps," she says, "I would like to," says, he said, "We have any books for sale?" She said, "Well, some I have for sale, but a lot of them I will give to you." He says, "Wonderful." So George bought some of the books from Sylvia, but other books Sylvia gave, and George said, "These are not for sale. These will be books that people will be able," he said, "we'll have a Sylvia Beach library where people can come and sit and read these books." He says, "These are not for sale." So that happened, and Mistral Bookshop was doing all right, and then along comes the so-called Beat Generation. And the Beat Generation produced a lot of wonderful people. You know of Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Gregory Corso, the oldest statesman of the Beat Generation, William Burroughs. Well, most of them lived at number 9 Rue Gîte le Coeur. The hotel had no name, so people used to call it the Beat Hotel because some of the Beat people hung out there. And I had lived there myself. Brian Geisen, I met Brian Geisen there, William Burroughs there, Corso was there, Ginsberg wasn't there. But Ginsberg had told me if ever go to Paris, it was a cheap place to stay. It's kind of expensive, it's going to cost you about 75 cents a day. And I said, "Well, it is steep, 75 US cents a day." He said, "Well, if you get a chicken there, that's what they call women in those days." So excuse me, so if you get a chicken there, you can make it cheaper. I said, "Not only that, Madame Rochelle, she's a good woman." So all this happened, and they start coming to the Mistral Bookshop because Ginsberg told me about it. And some of them start staying. George would put people up. He put it up. At that time, writers, poets, and pretty girls. But one of the things about poets and writers, they don't usually do any work. So it's best to have just good people, good guys that will do work. And because the poets and writers usually just busy doing that, and so pretty girls too. And the bookshop became a magnet. Remember, then still Mistral Bookshop. And then after Sylvia died, and then in 1964, George decided not only to have Sylvia Beach Memorial Library where people could come upstairs and read, but to name the bookshop Shakespeare and Company Bookshop. Leave that for Shakespeare and Company Bookshop. And that was the beginning of not only the continuation of the thing that Sylvia Beach had started, but he went beyond that by doing this. He made Shakespeare and Company Bookshop into an institution where you had poetry readings every Monday, book signings of all kinds of people. I mean, the last book signing of Anais Nin here in Paris, he appointed me and another guy by the name of Hank. Hank was next colonel in the American Army as Anais Nin's guards of honor. We kept the people moving. You'd come up and she'd sign your book and then move on. But there were people that showed up with maybe 4 or 5 books and she'd write their name like that. Then sometimes it was people with one book, a lot of little paper stuck in the pages. Look, first of all, I want to ask, why did you write this? And when did you write? What kind of state of mind? I said, Miss, you can't do that. There are a lot of people that would like to have their book signed. I'm not talking to you. But see, Hank, being an ex-military guy, he says, move. And they did. See, Hank had the hair that stood up on the end, the little crew cut and all like that, almost like out of one of those Hollywood movies. But so Anais Nin, she was a wonderful person. I've met her in New York, and my literary agent, who never did anything for me, Gunther Stuhlman, was very close to Anais, and she had him write the introductions to all her diaries. You will see Gunther. And she was a lovely, wonderful lady. And then there were obnoxious people that were in the line having to sign the books. Some of them came up and say, you must be older than my mother. Have you had your face lifted? Oh, that's you. Yes, you don't know. Back in the Beat Generation days, we used to say, you must not let squares bug us. We must have missionary eyes for them because they know not what they do. So, squares are squares. They don't know, they're not very hip to it. So Shakespeare and Company Bookshop became an institution. George also put people up because Sylvia Beach never put anyone up. He put people up. He also instituted a beautiful thing. I wish all the bookshops of the world would do it. To open at 12 in the day, close at 12 midnight, and never, no days that it's closed. Shakespeare and Company Bookshop stays open continuously. And we had that terrible fire there in October, but like a phoenix bird, the next day, Shakespeare and Company Bookshop was open, you see. So it's one of the places that is your bookshop, and always come here and help support the book by buying the books downstairs. We will have the library, Sylvia Beach Memorial Library will be open soon. And if you want to make yourself, a little bit of history, be sure and get a copy